My name's Jay Brown. This is Yoga Talks Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Today's a big day for the podcast. My friend Leslie Kaminoff is here. And I consider him to be a heavy hitter in the sense that this podcast has a lot to do with the inside track of being a yoga teacher and the industry. And if there's anybody who's been involved in that conversation, it's Leslie. In fact, Leslie's been involved in that conversation since it started. So it was really a pleasure to sit down with him, to pick his brain about the earlier times before I got into the yoga world, and to hear how those early seeds have borne their fruits and played out and continue to play out. We talk about a range of pressing issues, the Yoga Alliance, the International Association of Yoga Therapists. I just ask him a whole bunch of personal questions I've always been wanting to ask him. We talk about a whole bunch of stuff. It's a long conversation. We are going to get straight to it. Before we do, I want to mention that I think it's also a good warm-up or precursor to next week. We're going to listen to Andrew Tanner from the Yoga Alliance. I've got a blog post that I've written, and I'm going to put out the blog post and the podcast together. I think they go nicely. And that's on the new yoga therapy terminology policy. Finally got my mind around that and figured out what I wanted to say. I'm going to offer that to you next week. One other thing I want to say is thank you to all of you who've been reaching out to me again. I always have been saying this every time, but I feel compelled because I really enjoy the communications. Some of you have been wondering. I haven't been talking about how I am, and you're wondering how I am, and I appreciate that so much. Just to say, I've got a number of podcasts that I'm putting out this month. You're going to kind of hear from me pretty much every week, so we're going to have time, and I promise we're going to catch up. One more thing is I want to plug my new project. Gentle is the New Advanced. Jay Brown's online yoga workshop is available for pre-sale until the release date on March 22nd. If you pre-order, you get a little bit of a discount. I'm really excited. I got to watch several of the episodes, and it's just what I was hoping it was going to be. I was moved by one of them, and then the other one was a practice, and I got to see the things that I was hoping to see there that I think are going to illuminate what people are doing. So I'm excited. You can go to jbrownyogavideo.com. You can check it out. Again, it's available for pre-order until the release date on March 22nd. Okay, I think that's all. Like I said, we're going to get straight to my talk with Leslie Kaminoff. Thanks, you guys. Enjoy. Go ahead, talk into it. Let's see if it's working.
Check 1, 2.
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah?
Yeah,
good?
don't be shy. Yeah.
So
Make
put my
yourself
feet
comfortable. That's good. Put your feet up. I like that. I'm really happy to be here on a Wednesday with you because, you know, it wasn't so long ago I spent like a whole year where I was here on Wednesdays.
Well, academic year, yeah.
Oh, yes, that's right. 3 trimesters.
Yes.
And I miss it. It's been
Really?
a while. It happened just in a window, right, when my first daughter got old enough
Right.
to go to school and before we had our second daughter, which is where we've been for the last year.
Right.
But, and you're going to do a program later today. You're in the middle of one right now. Is it practices or principles?
Actually, for the last go-around, we've kind of combined them.
Oh, okay.
So it's a 2-year cycle, but I'm no longer making a distinction.
Okay.
In the live courses between principles and practices, I'm trying to integrate practices into the principles materials so that it'll take 2 years still to get through all of it.
Right, but this would be the last one.
The last cycle.
The last
at
cycle.
the breathing project of my live teaching here. Yes.
Wow, that's big news.
Yeah. Well, you were one of the first people we notified.
I know, I appreciated the
We
call.
wanted to reach out personally so people heard it firsthand from Amy and myself when we decided to close the studio.
Well, I think it's real classy that you guys have planned it out so far in advance, and 2 years, that it gives us all enough time And I kind of want to come back there because I do, I wrote that piece about like yoga centers having a 15-year expiration date on them. And I'm scared that that's proving to be some kind of prophecy or something.
Well, we wanted to prove you wrong by making it 13 years.
Yes. Well, in any case, we'll come back to that. We'll come back to the Breathing Project news.
Yeah.
What I wanted to come to, because I saw also that you have another one of your oral history of yoga sessions happening tomorrow night, and I'm not going to make it.
Oh, okay.
And I'm sorry I'm not going to make it because the topic is specifically this meeting in 1993, the Unity in Yoga meeting, right? And that just seems to me that was like that's like an inflection point or something.
Well, as it turns out, it was for a variety of reasons. I mean, the reason we chose 1993, of course, is because we were marking that as the 100th anniversary of yoga in America, based on Swami Vivekananda's presentation of Vedanta philosophy at the World Parliament of Religions in Chicago in 1893, which was timed to coincide with the Chicago World Exhibition there. So that was the reason for choosing that theme for that conference. Unity in Yoga had been doing pretty regular conferences for about 10 years at that point.
Oh.
So this was just the next conference that we were producing, but it was 93 and it was the 100th year, and so that's why we chose the theme.
And were you involved for that entire 10 years? When did you get involved with
No,
Unity?
not the entire 10 years. I began to get involved just a few years prior to that. The first Unity and Yoga conference I attended was at Murrieta Hot Springs, and that would have been, I think, 89.
And what got you there? Why did you end up at Unity and Yoga meeting in 89?
The main reason I went there is because I wanted to accost Gary Kraftsow.
Did you have a bone to pick with him, or you
No,
just
no,
wanted
no,
to meet him, or
I
you
didn't
wanted
know him well enough to have a bone to pick with him at that point. That would come later.
I see.
No, I didn't know him at all. But I had read an article in Yoga Journal that David Frawley had written about Gary. And what struck me really quite strongly was the language that Gary was using, which sounded remarkably similar to the way I was talking about yoga. And the only thing I knew about Desikachar at that point was what my friend Larry Payne had told me many years prior, like in 81.
So he mentioned Desikachar to you, but you didn't?
Just once, briefly, that he was the guy that was focusing on breathing.
Right.
And it's all in the breath. That's all he would say about it. Because he was at the beginning of his connection with Desikachar at that point. Larry Payne, of course, went off to start, IAYT,
right.
International Association of Yoga Therapists, which you and I have some joint history with.
We could get to that later.
Right. But he was the first person to tell me about Desikachar, and I promptly forgot his name.
Right.
But what I didn't forget was the idea that breathing could be at the center of the practice. So in the intervening years, between 81 and I guess 80, well, it would have been, when I read that article, it would have been 87, actually. So I'm going to correct myself. I think that the first Unity in Yoga I went to had to be 1987 because it was there that I met Gary.
Okay.
And he told me that there was going to be a seminar in 88, in the summer of 88, where Desikachar was coming here to present at Hamilton.
I see.
And Hamilton, which is a Colgate University.
And how had you become, like, in those interim years, you were doing other yoga, right?
Yeah, I was originally trained by Shivananda.
You were a Swami.
Yes, I was.
Wow. So
for a while.
That meant that theoretically you took vows.
Not theoretically. It was actual vows.
Vows, and the vows were
I would say that my sticking to the vows was somewhat theoretical, but the vows themselves were not theoretical. Yeah, and I was a terrible Swami. I was horrible. I mean, I only lasted 9 months, and I realized it wasn't my path. I was young. I was 23 years old.
And so, how at 23 did you even get interested in yoga in the first place to want to become a Swami?
Well, I was interested in yoga earlier at age 20.
Okay.
And I very quickly became involved in the organization. I did my teacher's training in 1979, so I was 21, and just started working with them, doing stage managing work and things like that. There were things
But
that
wait, how when you were 20, I still don't understand. When you were 20, you just decided, I'm going to go to a yoga class? Or?
No, actually, my father took me to my first yoga class. He was studying at the Shivananda Center here on 24th Street. It's just a few blocks from where we're sitting.
I see.
And so that's where I took my first class because my dad invited me, and I got hooked, mainly by the Shavasana.
Yeah, at 20, in my 20s, it's like you're trying to find stuff, so yoga provides sometimes a possible outlet for it.
And also, it wasn't just the asanas and pranayama. It was that at that time, Swami Vishnu, who founded the Shivananda organization, was organizing seminars about yoga and mysticism and its connection with new physics. I was I was deep into the Tao of Physics at that point, which was Fritjof Capra's book, and so I saw an ad for this seminar Swami Vishnu was producing that Fritjof Capra was presenting at. And it was so it was a combination of my philosophical interests along with discovering that I indeed had a physical body that could be made to work better.
And so you jumped full in and became
a
Swami.
Within a couple of years, I was full-time staff. I was a Swami, and I was being transferred to Los Angeles to run the yoga community out there. That would have been March of 1981.
So you moved from New York to Los Angeles in 81.
I did, and I was dropped right onto the Sunset Strip in the early 80s.
I was there, but I was in the San Fernando Valley. I was on the other side of the hill. I was just a squeaky little kid.
Well, where you would come right out from the valley into West Hollywood, down Laurel Canyon, that's where we were. Right where Laurel Canyon hits Sunset Strip. That's where the Shivananda Center was in the early 80s.
I've been there many a times.
Yeah,
wow.
Did you visit the liquor locker? Because that's the building we were attached to.
Wow, and you tell a tale of a big advertisement, a big billboard.
Well, there was a sign that we erected, which was alongside our building, which faced Sunset, and it was for the Complete Illustrated Book of Yoga, which was Swami Vishnu's best-selling book. It had sold about 1 million copies at that point, and it was a big orange sign which advertised the book and let people know that there was a center right there where they could study.
Okay, so now you're in Los Angeles. You're a Swami.
Yeah.
And you said that didn't pan out so great.
Yeah, well, they don't give a real good instruction manual when you take these vows as a young person. And on the first page, what it should tell you is that when you renounce things and announce that to the world, those things come back and hit you in the face and kick you in the ass 10 times harder than you imagined they ever could. Yeah. And that was true for all three vows, which are, poverty, obedience, and celibacy. And you take these vows not to have any of your own money. You're completely dependent on the organization, and I was, but you also rise to a position of authority within the organization. So they put me in charge of a center where I'm handling more money than I'd ever handled before. I'm in charge of the deposits and the bookkeeping and all of that. And so, I'm dispersing these funds. So, that it didn't feel like poverty to me, and also I'm in authority. People have to answer to me.
Yeah.
So,
you're making decisions then.
Yeah. The obedience thing was like people had to be obedient to me. Now, in theory, I had to be obedient to Swami Vishnu, and ultimately I was. But he wasn't around. He was doing his thing. He was traveling around the world and flying his peace missions and whatever. So I was, in a position where I couldn't refuse an order that was given to me by the higher ups. So I did renounce having my own say in where I lived and what my job was. But once I had that job, I was the person in authority.
Right.
And as far as the celibacy is concerned, I think you've heard me say this, that, apparently there's nothing more attractive to a member of the opposite sex than someone that's taken a vow of celibacy. And so, with being the person in authority and running the stuff, being this young person, and all of these, what the demographics is in the yoga world, all these women coming through the center.
And you're a young guy. I can only imagine.
Well, yeah. Imagine real hard, Jay.
I didn't have to imagine that hard.
Exactly.
Well,
you wrote a famous essay about what is all this shit about not dating your students. I'm a yoga teacher. How else am I going to meet women? Basically,
right.
That's what you said.
It was called Ethical Imperatives and Sexually Responsible Behavior. And,
right, but it was in response to a thread I created on eSutra, which was yogis behaving badly.
Ah, that's right. Well, because there was also like a bunch of scandals out there with Rodney Yee, and there's all this stuff in the news at that time, I remember.
Right.
And I just, that little post that I wrote back when, that did I proved to be right about that. I met my wife, and the reason I met her was because she read that piece.
Exactly.
She read that piece, and she had thought I was a player, but then she read that, and she said, "Oh, he's actually a nice guy," so she went out with me.
It actually fulfilled its purpose perfectly.
It did. So, all right. So you were Swami, and then you said you read that thing in '87. Is that before or after you left that? Were you still a Swami?
No. I stopped being a Swami while I was still director of the Shivananda Center.
Okay.
I managed to stay on for the better part of a year as director after I renounced my vows.
I see.
I was a very successful director.
Then you could be above the boards with everything.
Yes. Above the boards and under the sheets.
Yes.
But I was a very effective director, and there was no reason to get rid of me.
Right.
Until I refused a direct order.
Oh, I see. That was what happened.
Yeah. And the direct order was you need to come back to the East Coast and be staff at the ranch in the Catskills.
Ooh, and why do you think they did that if you were doing such a good job?
Because my unyogic lifestyle had become a problem. And there were certain other staff members there that had a problem with it and reported me.
I see.
And so basically at that time in that organization, being sent to be staff at the ranch was the equivalent to being sent to Siberia. It was being run by Robert Moses at the time, who was still Swami Shankarananda. And they had a sprout business in South Fallsburg where you'd have to get up at like 4 a.m. and go and turn over these big bathtubs full of alfalfa sprouts. And it was miserable. It was, and literally at that time, the staff at the ranch was populated by ex-convicts and, scoundrels of every sort. It was a real.
Well, it's interesting to say that because I
place.
have, having gone out and taught at some of these places, not at the ranch, but there does seem like there's kind of a circuit of like being in community where if you kind of want to drop out for a while, you can go live on different ashrams and.
Yeah, if you can be competent at menial labor, and not create too much of a ruckus. There's a place for you in these ashrams because they always need labor, and it's basically in exchange for room and board, and you get to lead a spiritual lifestyle and eat vegetarian food and all of that, and it still is like that in some regards. Right.
So you weren't down with coming back and working
I said
at the
no.
ranch.
Yeah. I would say it was the celibacy that got me out of my robes, but it was the obedience that got me out of the organization. And at that point, I had a girlfriend. Her name is Linda Huey. We're still friends. She's 11 years older than me. She is. She'll always be 11 years older. And I went to live with her in Santa Monica, and it was through her that I got introduced into the field of sports medicine and began learning a lot about anatomy and physical rehabilitation techniques and manual techniques and basically just a lot of the things that I do today.
Right. And then it also makes sense that you would start to become interested in something like unity and yoga, like what else is going on out there in terms of yoga.
Well, I was an organizer on my own. In L.A., I was an organizer already. I started something called the Professional Yoga Teachers Cooperative.
Okay.
Which is just my own idea of, yoga teachers who were not affiliated with spiritual organizations, who were independent, who were basically trying to make their living in the early 80s teaching yoga independently. And so we organized some programs and retreats and various other things.
Where was the California Yoga Teachers Association? Because I remember there being
That's San Francisco.
That's San Francisco.
And it was Iyengar.
I see.
Yeah,
see. Was that happening? That was happening since early 70s or something like that.
Well, yeah, that was Ramajoti Vernon
right.
and Judith Lassiter and a few others started that and started Yoga Journal.
Right.
And Rama is the person who went on to start Unity in Yoga, so I ended up working with her.
Okay. And so you read some article. What was the article that you read that was about Gary?
It was an article that David Frawley, who I was later to meet and become friends with as well, wrote about Gary Kraftsow because he had been on Maui for some other retreat, and Gary was there teaching asana. And he found Gary's approach to be very intelligent, and he was motivated to write this piece for Yoga Journal. And that's where I first heard about Gary, but where I was reintroduced to the fact that Desikachar was behind this breath-centered approach to yoga. And then that's when I remembered that he was the guy that Larry
had mentioned.
Payne had told me about as being focused on breathing.
And so did you talk to Gary at the Unity and Yoga meeting? Did you accost him?
Yeah, I annoyed the hell out of him, asking him all kinds of questions, anatomical questions and methodological questions and this and that. And I think he saw that I was sincere. And he told me about this a seminar, which was happening the following summer at Colgate University in Hamilton, New York, where Desikachar would be presenting. And I immediately contacted who I needed to and signed up for it. But what I really wanted to sign up for was the week after that, which was the newly forming Vini Yoga certification program that I was absolutely certain I had to be a part of.
Oh, I see. Well, I spoke with Chase Bossart recently, and he talked about he was at Colgate and that program that someone created there that the Desikachar family was involved in. So there's a connection there that you went there in '88 to meet him.
Yes.
And then what was that like when you met him? Did that reaffirm your intuitions that this was the direction you wanted to go, or had you already started studying with Gary before that because you'd said you wanted to do the video?
No, I can't say I was studying with Gary. Just taking a few classes at a conference isn't studying with someone, but it was a connection.
Okay.
So there was no book then. Heart of Yoga hadn't come out, and I had not yet heard about Religiousness in Yoga, which is the book that Heart of Yoga was based on.
Right.
Which
is just, if I'm not mistaken, transcriptions from talks at Colgate. Is that right?
Basically, it was a month-long program he gave in 1976 at Colgate.
Right.
When Gary was still an undergrad there, I think. And anyway, but at the time, I was running my own studio by then. I had my first studio in the East Village.
So wait, when did you come back to New York then?
After the Olympics. So that was the fall of '84.
I was at the '88 Olympics in Los Angeles.
'84 Olympics.
'84 Olympics.
'88 right. was Seoul.
Oh, right.
You didn't go to Seoul, South Korea.
No. But I went to the '84.
What sports did you see?
Track. I remember seeing
I was in the same stadium, man.
Events.
I was in the Coliseum that whole time for track and field because those were the athletes we were working with.
Wow.
So you saw Mary Decker take a tumble when she bumped into Zola Budd. Yeah.
I did see that.
Yeah, wow. I saw the whole thing through my binoculars. I saw it happen in real time.
Wow.
And I saw the way it happened, too.
All right, so...
It was Mary's fault, by the
way. So wait a second. So let me get this right. So after you stopped being a director for Shivananda when?
The fall of '82.
I see.
I moved to Santa Monica, was living with Linda Huey, started working in sports medicine, started traveling because she was a travel agent, and I started working with her as a travel agent.
Okay.
So...
What brought you back to New York?
It was time. The apartment that I had in the East Village that I had held on to, my subtenant was moving out. I had to come back to keep the lease going.
Okay.
And I was getting restless in my relationship with Linda.
Okay.
It was getting way too serious a commitment to me.
Yeah.
Which I had an allergy to.
Yeah.
And we tried to make it long distance for a while, but, East Coast, West Coast was tough.
All right. So you came back. The apartment was free, and you said, I'm going to go back to New York.
Yeah.
And you came back to New York and opened a yoga center straight away?
Not straight away, no. I came back in the fall of '84. I began working for an osteopath here in the city, Richard Backrack, who was famous for working on dancers. And so my sports medicine background worked well with his dance medicine practice. At the time, the thing I was doing was not yoga in these practices. I was working in the field of microelectrical therapy. There were these devices.
Like a machine that you hook up to?
Yeah, it's a machine that administered microscopic amounts of electricity, sort of like acupuncture without needles, and it was used for healing soft tissue injuries. And so it worked really well with the athletics and with the dancers. So that's what I was hired to do for this osteopathic practice when I came back here to New York. I wasn't using manual skills at that point because I hadn't really developed that part of my practice yet, although I had been trained in it to some extent in LA. But it was during that time, like in '85, that I began a private practice that was combining yoga and the hands-on myofascial release manual skills that I had acquired in the Sports Medicine Institute.
All right, so that makes sense. And so you're doing that for a while, and then when do you decide to open a yoga center if you're not really so focused on yoga?
That would have been in around, let's see, I met my first wife in '86, in the fall of '86. In the summer of '86, I went back to the ashram, the Shivananda ashram, do my advanced teachers training course.
You did?
I did.
And why did you do that if you had sort of parted ways from them?
It was to reconnect and make amends.
I see.
We didn't leave on the best of terms, me and the organization. And Swami Vishnu was still relatively healthy then. He was still teaching some of the lectures in '86. He had not had his stroke yet. And I was able to reconnect in a positive way. And actually, it was during that advanced teachers training course in the summer of '86 that I taught for the first time yoga anatomy to a group of yoga teachers.
Oh, right.
Because even though I was a student in the advanced course, I had already had this experience in sports medicine and anatomy, and the guy teaching anatomy for our course had become completely obsessed with cellular biology. And he thought that was the most important thing for us to study. And we got like 3/4 of the way through the month, and we hadn't covered a single muscle, bone, or joint. And we were all getting restless, and we approached him and said, are we going to get to muscles, bones, and joints? And he was still deep into the mitochondria at that point, And apparently it wasn't in his game plan. And so someone had to volunteer.
Yeah.
And
you
it was
stepped
me
up
to teach muscles, bones, and joints.
There's a great picture of you in an all-body suit.
I also did have the unitard with the muscles sewn into it, which I brought with me because I thought it would be cool for like a talent show or something. And the reason I had it is because I was at the time working on a video project with a company called Private Music here in the city, who I think are most famous for having discovered Yanni, or infamous, I suppose. But we were working on a video yoga project, and the idea was for me to do the sequence in the suits showing some of the major muscles, and that's why I had the unitard.
Well, that's a strange foreshadowing of yoga anatomy.
Yeah, it's strange in a slim, good body kind of a way.
Materialize in other ways later on.
No, it was interesting, but that does that is the moment where that became part of what I could do,
right?
Which is to teach to other yoga teachers,
right?
And so I went back in the fall of that year of '86. I met Roberta, who's Sean's mom. You know my son Sean because he took your teacher training course.
Crazy,
right? And so I met her. We were married in the spring of '87, and she was also a yoga teacher, dancer, mover, body worker.
Okay.
And she was studying at the time with a much-loved yoga teacher here in the city, someone you've probably never heard of, named Eric Bielman.
I don't think I have.
And he taught something called American Yoga.
Okay.
But he was also one of the first people I heard of who died of AIDS.
Oh.
And there was an outpouring of love for him at this memorial service in a loft in Soho. And Roberta, even though she was a student, I couldn't be there because she was very sick. She had some kind of flu that day. So I went. And I was in this room with a bunch of other yoga teachers and yoga students showing just this outpouring of love and affection, like how much a yoga teacher could affect someone's lives, which was the main impression I had. And I had it in the back of my mind to sort of start a center in New York. Because in LA, I had been renting spaces and teaching group classes there, but I hadn't taught group classes really regularly for a while, just some small private groups at that point. So I'd been thinking of opening a studio, and I imagined what my memorial service might be like, and it made a real impression. And that motivated me to really look for a space, and I found one in a newly opened arts center in a former Catholic parochial school building on East 4th between A and B. There's a place called the Rapp Arts Center.
Wow.
And the building used to be the parochial school for the Holy Redeemer Church, which is on 3rd Street. And so I rented a 3rd-floor space. It was 1,500 square feet for about $1,500 a month.
Mm-hmm.
Which is unheard of rent
Yeah,
now.
I'm flabbergasted by the number.
Yeah. And there was this really weird dude on the ground floor in the back. When you went in to get to the elevator, you could see his studio. It was a little space where he was printing these bootleg T-shirts and doing quite well at it. And that was Eddie Stern.
Oh, yes. He was a T-shirt guy. I heard that.
He was the T-shirt guy, yeah. And he had long, long red hair. He had a ponytail down to his ass. And he was kind of starting to study yoga then, but he wasn't a teacher at all.
Yeah, he was like a little hardcore kid or something. Right?
He was.
Yeah.
He was.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so now you have a center, and now that kind of is getting us closer to this meeting in 1993. So you had the center for a while, and you were still involved with Unity and Yoga. You guys had these meetings leading up into the 93, you said.
Yeah, and I wanted to start
annually. How many were there? How many times were you guys getting together?
What, Unity and Yoga?
Yeah.
It was like once a year.
Yeah.
For the big conferences. This was before Yoga Journal was doing conferences.
Right.
Their first conference was 95.
Okay.
The last Unity and Yoga conference was 94.
Okay.
So...
and who is the person behind this? Who's making the Unity and Yoga thing happen? You said you were involved, but was there some person?
Ramajoti Vernon.
She was one.
Who was one of the founders of California Yoga Teachers Association and Yoga Journal, and a real sort of mover and shaker in the yoga world, a real influence. And there were other people involved on the executive board level. Patricia Hansen, Nancy Ford Cohn, Sandra Kozak. And then on an advisory level, a lot of recognizable national teachers, many of whom are still teaching.
And you just reached out to them and wanted to get involved? How did you?
I wanted to get involved, and there wasn't a lot happening in New York, and I wanted to open a New York chapter. At the time, there were yoga associations scattered around the country. There was one down in the D.C. area called Maya, Mid-Atlantic Yoga Association. And I thought it was weird that New York didn't have an association, so I started Nyaya, New York Area Yoga Association.
Okay.
And started a meeting, of all the studio owners. Sharon and David were there.
Yeah.
And Robbie Singh was there, and a bunch of people that were active at the time. Rama came in and addressed the meeting. Vyas Houston was there.
Okay.
That's where he launched his first ever Sanskrit training.
American Sanskrit Institute.
Eventually, it was the American Sanskrit Institute, but he was just branching off from the Ananda Ashram at that point, doing his own thing.
Okay, so all these people are there. These are yoga center owners. These are yoga teachers. It's 93, and what happens at this meeting? What is this? The discussion is about standards.
No, not standard.
Yet.
No, that wasn't even on the horizon. The 93 thing was the 100th anniversary of yoga in America.
That's the reason
and
you guys
invited
got to.
all the gurus to come.
Yeah.
And Indra Devi was scheduled to come. She couldn't make it at the last minute. But Satchidananda was there, and Amrita Sai was there, and Yogi Bhajan was there, and Anandamoy from SRF, Self-Realization Fellowship, was there. Vijay Pratap was there from the Sky Foundation. Sant Keshavadas was there, singing saint. Gary was supposed to be there. He couldn't make it at the last minute. I ended up combining our classes and teaching his students as well as mine.
So all these gurus came and they spoke? They taught?
They spoke, they taught, they lectured, they chanted.
And was there like a theme? Like what was
the theme
the,
was
what
celebrating
we guys,
100 years of yoga in America.
And was there talk of like the future of yoga in America at the time? Like I'm curious, like what was
celebrating our past and then looking to the future was kind of the idea. Yeah,
I see.
Yeah, I have the brochure right here. I pulled it out for the talk tomorrow, and I was involved in every level of getting it started, which included designing the logo stuff and brochures and doing the early registration and all of that. So it was 100 years of yoga in America, honoring our past, creating our future. That was the theme.
All right.
Yeah.
And so it went well? It was a big hit, I'm sure. Like that was...
It was successful. We had a very good turnout. And it was to turn out to be the last conference that was oriented towards these gurus.
Uh-huh.
Because and also Brahmadana Saraswati was there, Dr. Mishra, and he would be dead in less than a year. Mm-hmm. Amrit Desai would be deposed in about a year. Satchidananda would pass away not too long after that. Mm-hmm. Sant Keshavadas as well. So it was really the ending of one era and the beginning of another. Mm-hmm. Because it was right around then that the Ashtanga influence started coming in, and yoga started to gain a lot more popularity because it was now more athletic. People were getting workouts, and it joined with the fitness industry, which at that point was only about 10 years old itself.
Well, I mean, that happened a little bit more even after I came around, which was more like 95 96.
Yeah.
But let's finish with Unity in Yoga, because what happened after the 93 meeting? Like, Unity in Yoga wasn't around when I came in 95. So what happened between 93 and 95?
Well, we had an executive board meeting in the fall. The conference in 93 was in the spring. We had an executive board meeting in Aspen, Colorado, in the fall of 93 to plan the 94 conference. Mm. In retrospect, we were dealing with very little lead time for these sorts of events.
Yeah.
These days my schedule gets planned a year and a half in advance. And any teacher worth their salt who you want to invite to a conference plans that far ahead.
Yeah.
We were operating on less than a year's lead time already for the next conference planned in Colorado for 94. And I was to be part of that too as a producing member of the executive board. As it would turn out, I ended up resigning from Unity in Yoga not too long after that board meeting.
Okay. Why? Well, what happened at the board meeting?
It was two major things. Number one, I was not being allowed to do the job I wanted to do for the 94 conference.
Okay.
Which was to organize a strong entertainment side to it.
Oh.
And get some big name people who were also yoga practitioners to come and be a part of it. What was
your thinking behind that? Just to make it more fun, or?
Well, how many more people would sign up if they thought Sting would be there?
A lot.
Yeah, right. So, but at least I was thinking on that level. I was thinking big, and that was the job I wanted to do. I wanted to be in charge of the entertainment side, because for the 93 conference, I had produced a choreographed dance piece by the Jivamukti dancers, which went over really well. It was the only time I'd seen yoga dance done well at a conference. Usually when you see that, it's neither yoga nor dance, and it sucks. Okay. But this was a really good thing. And, of course, it was Maud Carlson who was responsible for it, right?
Maud Carlson was my first ever yoga teacher.
I know, you lose your shit every time Maud gets mentioned.
It's just so crazy that anybody knows her. Of course you know her. She was around, and she was in that performance.
Exactly. She choreographed it. And so I was like, did you like that? Yes. Would it go over well? Yes. It was the hit of the conference. Let me do something even bigger and better for the next one. But they wanted to force me into a different role, which I really wasn't interested in doing. And frankly, we weren't getting paid. We were volunteers. And if as a volunteer who's devoting a lot of time and energy and money, I lost money working on these conferences, let me do the job I want to do. So I wasn't being allowed to do that. Plus, the major thing was that was when the dialogue about standards really started, was at that meeting.
Okay.
Because I authored the Unity in Yoga statement, which the board later reviewed and altered about
Right, there
standards.
was like 3 things.
It was 3 things. We support strong standards, any educational programs that lead to better standards, and we are against any entity, organization that would impose these standards on the yoga community.
Right.
And when they deleted that third thing, which I felt was the critical statement, that didn't sit well with me, and I resigned. And so the 94 conference happened without me, and at that point, Yoga Journal was getting into the conference business, and their first Estes Park conference in Colorado was in 95. And so Unity in Yoga became dormant because it really didn't have a mission at that point.
I see.
And it remained dormant as a nonprofit until they did a name change and turned over their 501c3 nonprofit status to the ad hoc committee that had came up with the standards. So Unity in Yoga is the Yoga Alliance.
Wasn't it called the Yoga Teacher Alliance first before Yoga Alliance? Wasn't there like there was one iteration in there where there was a T
briefly,
in there?
Maybe, yeah. But at that point, I had also resigned from the ad hoc committee, so I got to resign twice from Unity in Yoga, basically.
I see. So the ad hoc committee on standards was that meeting, that board meeting in '94. Is that what you're talking about?
No, it wasn't a Unity in Yoga board meeting. Unity in Yoga wasn't in charge of the process at that point. It was happening at various conferences. It happened at a Kripalu conference. It happened at a yoga journal. It happened at the first yoga journal conference. Mm-hmm. There were a bunch of teachers who got together, started talking about standards.
I see. And were you at any of those talks? Or
no, I wasn't. I was at the one at Kripalu.
Okay.
Where we actually, in the room at Kripalu, came up with the final 200 and 500 hour standards. So I was part of that.
So
group.
You were there in the room when they came up with. And here's the thing that I want to say about that is, whenever I hear sometimes this mention that these yoga teachers got together and they created these 200-hour standards. Mm-hmm. And I've always felt, and from what I've gotten from you, that were you guys thinking of them as standards, or were they more like curriculum guidelines, educational resources?
Well, that's the way I was thinking about them.
Yeah.
And because I was thinking about them that way, I certainly wasn't interested in there being an organization out there administering them.
Right.
And I certainly wasn't thinking that any rational yoga teacher wanted to be sitting on the board of one of these organizations in judgment of other people's standards and deciding whether to accept or reject a training program's standards or an individual yoga teacher's standards. Right. And everyone else in the room felt the same way as me, except one person. And she became the first president of the Alliance. Well, because we all had a knot in our stomach. We all recognized it was like, oh, wow.
Yeah.
We're setting up a situation where one set of yoga teachers is going to have to judge the educational standards of other yoga teachers' programs or training. And I didn't want to do that.
Well, then they tried to skirt around it, but never have done so well. I mean, like the idea that they're not judging, they're just for registration.
Well,
it
is a registry.
Sort of like it's the blurry line of what we mean by standards,
What they're judging is whether you complete the paperwork.
Well, see, that was at the beginning, like for me, for a long time, that really seemed like that's obviously all it was just paperwork.
I don't think the Alliance ever pretended to be anything else.
Yeah.
But, when it turned out they couldn't even do that job well, then, we started having problems with it.
Well, but then there was the boom. Like, yoga became way more mainstream.
Oh, and by the way, the other thing I brought up at that, ad hoc meeting was the grandfathering issue. It's like, okay, this is all cool, but how do you determine the qualifications of the people who are teaching these programs?
Yeah.
And that's a question that really never got adequately answered.
Still to this day
exactly.
Unresolved. If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of J. Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.